What's up, fight fans? It's your boy Jack Slack. No clever pun today, let's get right into it. One last look back at this McGregor-Mayweather fight. Well, I suppose it's the review, the post-fight analysis of it. So fairly important, but I'm not going to dwell on it forever, as I imagine a great many MMA fans are going to. You will hear the statistics about the punch stats in every pre-fight hype piece that the UFC puts together from now until forever. But you don't need me to lie to you. You don't need me to tell you that McGregor, was a masterful boxer. You don't need me to tell you that he was a bum. We'll talk about it honestly. I'll talk about the things that surprised me, the things that impressed me, and we'll try and stay positive on a fight that was, for most people, a very cynical cash grab. I watched bits and pieces of the undercard coming into this. I didn't really pay attention to most of it, but there were some interesting moments, most notably when the lad in the fight before the Mayweather-McGregor fight, the one who missed weight, can't remember his name, because I do not follow boxing very religiously anymore, but he had to get his shoelaces cut off because they were too long, which is very unusual. And then I realised that the referee was Russell Mora, and I was like, okay, well, as long as he has short enough shoelaces, he can hit the guy in the dick all he wants. Russell Mora, famous for being either corrupt or incompetent in that Egbeko versus... can't even remember who it was, but yeah, dick shots all around. Just look him up. Just look up Russell Mora. He's fucking awful. But then, coming into this fight, I was looking through all the referees that had been in Mayweather's fights. A lot of them just dog shit. I like Tony Weeks because he actually lets guys work out of the clinch, but again, he missed those low blows against Kovalev, which everyone's super salty about. But then that's the job of being a referee. You're going to get shat on regardless of what you do. It's as God says in Futurama, when you do your job right, people won't be sure you did anything at all. I thought Robert Byrd was an interesting official in this fight. Before the fight, you'll remember at the primer and at the piece that I wrote, the short piece I wrote for Vice beforehand, we talked about hanging on the back of the neck, passing Floyd out to the armpit side, trying to line up the left hand. McGregor tried that a couple of times. We'd seen him use it against Paulie, even though I don't like to put too much emphasis on carefully selected 5-second clips put out by the camp. But I thought that'd be interesting because Mayweather does duck in so low all the time. But as soon as he got on the back of Mayweather's head, Robert Byrd freaked out. And we were talking about this last week, but these blind spots that referees have, and then they have like a one pet peeve each. So Kenny Bayless is terrified at the clinch, but he's fine to let Floyd use his elbow or whatever. But Vic Draculic was the other one I talked about, where he was telling Floyd off for pushing and stuff, but let Castillo walk all the way around him, hitting him in the back, in the kidneys. And they both looked at each other and laughed because they couldn't believe the referee let him do that. But Robert Byrd seemed terrified of hanging on the neck, but fine with Conor McGregor literally hammer-fisting Floyd Mayweather in the back of the head. Let's be honest, if this were not the biggest match of the century or whatever they were billing it as, he would have been either Doctor Point or probably disqualified the number of times he did it. Lucky to get away with nothing, very basic, verbal warning, not even like a stop, I'm telling you don't do this, just ignored it for the most part. And Mayweather got in some cheeky elbows too, of course. A couple of nice low blows. In fact, the hanging off the head pass out to the armpit side set up that dick punch in round 9 that everyone thought McGregor had hurt Mayweather, but it was a very clear right hand straight to the jewels. So that was interesting at any rate, the referee, because we all suspected it would play a part in it, but it was interesting to see how much of a part it did or didn't play. The clinch, pretty much a non-factor. It was McGregor who was desperate to use it to recover, as he had against Diaz, and he hung on the overhook against Diaz. And we said that the overhook was somewhere that he could rough Floyd up if Floyd went to his classical tie-up, one under, one over. But if you watch Floyd going into clinches in this fight, firstly, he tries to stop the clinches for the most part. Secondly, his head is always underneath McGregor's, just as Miguel Cotto did to him. just as I said, cost Manny Pacquiao and Canelo and so many other guys the fight, because as soon as he gets chest to chest, they have no idea what to do. But Mayweather's head was always in position that he could continue punching afterwards, even though Bird broke them immediately. But when they did get into clinches, you'll notice that either Floyd had both hands over, hugging hugging McGregor around the shoulders, or both arms in, as if he didn't want the clinch at all. Very rarely gave McGregor the overhook, because I would suspect, knowing that McGregor's a strong wrestler, that he does all this stuff, even if Mayweather knew very little about MMA, he would know that that's the sort of area where if McGregor fought dirty, and he was fighting dirty, with the hammer fists and stuff, if he were going to fight dirty in the clinch, that would be the sort of thing where he could hurt him, ruin his shoulder for the fight or whatever. So that was interesting. Should we talk about the punch stats? Let's talk about the punch stats, because everyone's obsessed with the punch stats. Conor McGregor landed more punches, statistically, whoever's counting those, than Pacquiao, Canelo, all sorts of other people. But the people who are obsessing over this, and I'm going to say this now, Mayweather was clearly never in trouble in the first round. He got hit with one blow that was meaningful, and the rest were all on his guard, or just he'd crunch over and take it on his abdomen rather than his solar plexus. Through the first however many rounds that he gave away, watching it back especially, clearly never in trouble. But I liked what McGregor was doing with his combinations and his switching of angles and his constant moving. I think, we'll be talking about this later, but I think that's a good sign for his future and how his boxing will have been affected by taking this half year off just to box. However, he didn't do anything that really troubled Mayweather, and we were talking about how important distance was going to be before this fight. In the primer videos, I said, look, boxers are not going to run through that big distance and give you their chin. Because this whole thing about power, the oh my god power that Paulie said that he didn't have, and then it turned out in the fight he didn't. So, but the whole thing is that McGregor hits guys clean and he hits them running in a lot of the time. And Floyd Mayweather is not going to run at you, especially if there's no kicks or anything keeping him out at that distance, So Floyd put up his gloves, walked him down, and if you watch his right hand lead, every time he throws it, he's definitely in distance to connect it. He knows exactly how far he needs to get it, and he throws it at a time when he thinks that McGregor's not going to be able to pull out the way in time. He throws lots of nice feints, has McGregor moving his head away, slipping and trying to turn off, and then he'll crack him while he's turning. This fight really is a lesson in how to hit Conor McGregor. Obviously, it'd be more complicated in mixed martial arts with the kicks, the ring cutting didn't really play a factor in this. He let McGregor circle around, but it's that getting into distance before hitting, and part of that is gloves up and walk him down. Mayweather threw a dozen jabs in the fight total, so there was no double jabbing or anything like that. He just made sure he was in distance and then went straight to the right hand lead. But if you watch him, the distance is perfect, and whenever McGregor throws his left hand, Floyd will take a little step back, or he'll pull his head back, or he'll crunch over and take it on his abdomen while it's all curled up in a ball rather than spread out and taking it on the solar plexus. And then he'll throw back his own right hand, but he'll just make sure he's back in distance before he does it. That's the main takeaway from this fight, just beautiful distancing. And then, of course, after round 3, when he is just gloves up, walk him down, basically just what Nate Diaz did in the second fight. The bits that Nate Diaz won were when he wasn't reaching for McGregor, and he was just forearms up and walking him down. Because if you don't give him those clean shots, the easy counters, he has to throw punches to keep you off him. And, he's probably going to hit your forearms or the top of your head if you're in a good, what we call the bull guard, because it's from Letway, but, just a classical double forearms guard. If you keep that up, he's going to hit the top of your head or your forearms. He was turning over some nice elbows against Diaz, but obviously couldn't do this against Floyd. And more in the later stages against Diaz, he was going for the body more. But he was shooting left straights to Mayweather's body, and Mayweather was taking them on the elbows. He was bringing them in and taking them nicely, and he was also just crunching over it and making sure that he was taking it in the abdomen rather than in the solar plexus, which is the so-called mark, a real soft point on the body. And to be honest, someone asked me about this afterwards, and I said I really like Justin Gaethje's chances against him now. If Justin Gaethje's coach, Trevor Whitman, that'd be, just said don't lead with any kicks, just because 2 of the 3 times he got caught against Michael Johnson were just during or coming down off lazy low kicks with no setup. If he just kept his guard up and walked him down, I think he'd probably have a lot of success. It's not giving him those clean shots that he likes so much. That really seems to bug McGregor. The counter left uppercut in the opening round, which is now the gif that everyone is using all the time. I thought that was really nice because obviously Floyd wasn't giving him the easy left-hand counters. Floyd's not going to lunge forward face first and give you all that distance to work through. He makes sure he's in distance and then he shoots in. But that left uppercut came up between their chests and it was just a nice inside punch for a guy who is looking to land the right hand and move in too close to be hit, or close enough that you have to throw a hook and then he'll duck under it. If you watch Mayweather's right hand leads, almost always he'll throw the right hand lead, and if he catches you just on the end of his reach, he'll let you keep moving away. And if he throws the right hand lead, catches you perfect, he'll duck in immediately after it. He just never gives you the chance to throw back, really. Couple of interesting notes from the clinch. I mean, people were complaining that I didn't talk about the clinch enough in my post-fight article at Vice. Oh, we'll talk more about my whole Vice thing later. But the clinch was interesting because Floyd deliberately gave his back up at several points. Well, McGregor was moving past it because that's what he's been drilled in his entire life. And then his interviews after the fight were actually really interesting. He seems to have a real good grasp of what's happening while he's fighting. But he was talking about, Floyd put in the frame, which is the forearm across the throat or the cross face, as I call it in kickboxing and boxing at least. And nobody hits as well off that as Floyd, except maybe Badr Hari. Those guys are so good at getting you to go for a clinch, putting the forearm across you, and just replacing the forearm with the right hand or the left hand if they've got the other forearm there. Really nice stuff. And that was the big blow at the end of the fight that had it waved off. It was straight off that crossface. And you saw how effective he was in stopping McGregor from tying him up. Like, McGregor was just looking for the clinch for the entire last round, and that forearm just kept stopping him, and the right hand would go in on the face immediately afterwards. But yeah, a couple of those times he put the forearm across and McGregor shucked it past and went to his back. And then in the post-fight interview, he was like, and I kept doing that, but obviously there was nothing I could do from there, so I was just wasting my energy. Yeah, really interesting, because obviously turning the back deliberately can be penalised for timidity in boxing, because there are no legal targets on the back, obviously. So it was interesting, because if you, as the referee, think that McGregor's going to the back, then that's not a foul on Floyd. But Floyd was just sort of like curling up and saying, okay, I'm not going to bother turning. But then if you turn to face them, that's when you get cracked. Hector Camacho used to do this all the time. He'd go around behind the guy, and as the guy turned around, he'd hit him with a hook in the face. Really, like if you've never seen Hector Camacho in his prime, he was ludicrously fast, and he'd just go around behind the guy, and as they turned around, he'd hit him in the face. Whereas if they stay there and curl up, you've got no legal targets, So it's not a very manly way to fight. I mean, my Facebook feed was just filled with, and he curled up in a ball and he somehow won the fight. And you're like, can't really complain when he knocked the guy out, Maybe if he won the decision, you could be like, shouldn't be giving points for that. But the scorecards are a whole nother thing we'll get on into in a second. But yeah, I thought that was interesting that he just curled up in a ball and let McGregor go around behind him. I don't know what the best idea would be from there. I think stopping and hoping the ref would deal with it. But at a certain point, Robert Byrd was just like, no, do something, Floyd. And then they just continued from McGregor behind him. There are a couple of instances where he caught the overhook on the glove, clamped the glove in the armpit, and then used his other glove almost in like a arm spin, shoulder throw style position, just on the same side, underhooked, and caught the elbow with the same arm. That's, two arms on one. And that's a really nice clinch that James Toney used to use a lot. You just catch one glove and you drive your shoulder into them so that the only thing exposed to their free hand is your back, basically, which is a nice little technique. Actually, it reminded me of something I saw this week of Leo Nogueira, who had that great match at ADCC with Benson Henderson. Grappler, sorry, I should make that clear. But he's a real guillotine hunter, does a lot of guillotines and darces. And he hit this beautiful overhook butterfly sweep on a guy, lifted him up with the overhook, with the butterfly hooks and an overhook, and then he underhooked on the same side that he had the overhook with his free arm. And performed well. I've heard it called a Shaolin escape. I think it was Bill Cooper called it that. But basically, when you underhook the body and turn out, and it lines up that dast nicely. But he did it from a butterfly sweep, which was really cool. I do like that sort of stuff where you do the arm spin on the floor, basically. But anyway, yeah, nothing to do with that. I did write an article about that particular clinch, though, and how it matched up with various sumo techniques. I think it was called James Toney's School of Wrestling or something like that. But interesting clinch method, and it came up a couple of times in the fight. I mean, if Mayweather hadn't watched any film of McGregor, he certainly knew how to deal with him in a very similar fashion to Nate Diaz. It was that gloves up and walk down, except he really didn't eat any clean blows, spare that uppercut. A couple of nice jabs, and this is what I'm going to say, I was very impressed with Conor McGregor and his boxing, but I'm not going to lie to you and be like, well, he landed the most punches ever on the greatest of all time, blah, blah, blah. It was impressive in the way that, if you watch two guys spar and one's much, much better than the other, and he's like, show me what you got, but you're actually quite impressed with how the other guy's coming along. That's how it was impressive. It wasn't impressive him being competitive with Floyd Mayweather, because it wasn't really competitive at any point. And I think focusing on the punch stats like that is pretty disingenuous, which is why a lot of the MMA press are doing it, because they know that McGregor's rabid fan base will do that. And of course it makes great sound bites for future promos for his fights. But if you focus on those punch statistics, you're overlooking the sort of fight it was, because this was not at all a Mayweather fight that we're familiar with. Manny Pacquiao, Floyd Mayweather barely wanted to get close enough to fight at most points in the fight. He was very much on the distance and running from Pacquiao, pivoting off any time Pacquiao stepped in along the ropes. In fact, he did an interesting interview about it where he said Pacquiao's footwork's great, but he does like to square up and get set to punch, so he had to keep him moving. Now, the idea that Conor McGregor cut the ring on Mayweather, he didn't. Or, in the first he put him on the ropes quite nicely, but he wasn't fighting the same Mayweather game that someone like Pacquiao or Canelo or someone like that was fighting, This was the least Mayweather-like performance anyone's ever seen from Mayweather. He just walked him down, and that's not Mayweather's game. He throws 30 punches around and doesn't let his opponent throw any punches around. But this one, he came forward throwing barely any punches for the most part early on, just allowing his opponent to work against his guard. So focusing on those punch stats, very disingenuous. But what are you gonna expect from people who want to make a narrative out of it, whereby McGregor did better than any other boxer against Floyd Mayweather? I did laugh beforehand about karate angles and things like that. I said there's only so many ways you can hit a guy with two fists and no backhands and no spins, and they all fall under the the banner of boxing. But McGregor hit some hikikomi shifts, pull push, which is bring the lead foot back and then step in with the other foot. He hit a few nice jabs off that to the body, and he went, it doubled from low to high at one point and caught Mayweather out. Didn't really set up much off it, but it was a nice little look, and it scored him some points. And it was something that no one would have done against Mayweather in years and years and years. In fact, the interesting thing about this fight was watching the switches, because McGregor was switching in combination, and during the fight, Mayweather, when you watch him switch stances, and he did in this fight, it's very well hidden, and that's how well hidden it is. You might not have seen it. He does it when the referee breaks them. He'll come back as soon, as the referee's moving out of the opponent's vision and revealing Mayweather, he's in a different stance, and that's how he catches guys out. He caught DeMarcus Corley, is it? Chop. People had a go at me for forgetting his name and refusing to look it up last week, but that's how he caught him with a lead right hook in their fight, because he came in on a different stance, and Corley didn't expect him to be in that stance, and he cracked him with a lead right hook. It was lovely. Same thing with a left hand lead against Sean Mitchell. Something that I think MMA fighters could definitely steal, because if you are in a prolonged clinch along the fence or something like that, and the ref breaks you, or you stood up from the ground, you were in the guard for a long time, they stand you up, just as the referee's pushing you back, come in a different stance, like you're ahead of them mentally then, because they haven't seen you switch. They haven't gone, shit, need to adjust here, They haven't made that subconscious mental adjustment. But yeah, really just a nice trick that Mayweather does a lot, and a real sign of savvy veteranness. What I will say about Conor McGregor is that, all parties involved in this were in it for the money, but Conor McGregor was serious about this. Like, he came out and immediately tried to do clever things to Floyd Mayweather. He put the volume on him. He put combinations on him. He moved into the ropes, tried for the left straight to the solar plexus, did just really savvy stuff. He didn't come out... And some people speculated that this might have been him throwing away his puncher's chance in order to surprise Mayweather with the volume and the precision. Well, not precision, because he wasn't really hitting him that well, but trying to work volume and trying to... Well, he even Ray Leonard and people on commentary were saying he's looking like the boxer and Mayweather's looking like the brawler. But he was absolutely deadly serious about trying to finish him, or beat him at least. But it's interesting, always interesting, I find, listening to McGregor's corner in his fights. I've said it before, Owen Roddy and John Kavanagh are very smart men. And I'm quite affectionate about them generally, just knowing the Straight Blast Gym story. When I was researching Notorious and writing that book, just anyone I read anything from or talked to about John Kavanagh who'd known him, they only had good things to say about him. He's a guy who had a degree, I believe it was in engineering or something like that. He's got a respectable STEM degree, and he basically threw away years of his life on a sport that nobody gave a shit about. And is now responsible for this huge growth of MMA in Ireland. And he seems like a down-to-earth guy about it. But he also comes up with really good game plans. I mean, there's this whole thing where people are like, he bottled lightning with McGregor. If McGregor would have been great anywhere, and if he hadn't turned up at that gym, they'd just be regional guys still, and this, that, and the other. But if you listen to their advice in the corner, it's always solid. If you listen to their game plans, they're always solid. And a lot of what Owen Roddy and John Kavanagh do, I noticed this particularly in the Diaz fights, is desperately try to reel McGregor in from whatever he's trying to do. There's the success of that team, or rather McGregor, seems to be largely to do with his team telling him, okay, now just stop trying to throw the left hand or stop trying to knock him out. Against Diaz, they were constantly the second Diaz fight. He won by exploiting the obvious flaw in Diaz that he can't check low kicks and really struggles to cut the ring. And they're trying to keep him circling, keep him using the low kick, throwing out the jab, doing the smart things that Diaz has always had a problem with. And then he starts abandoning that, and they're like, please go back to it. get your guard up, move around, and get offline. Don't just stand there throwing punches at his guard when he's just trying to walk you down. And in this fight, too, I think it was between the 5th and 6th rounds, Owen Roddy says he's trying to get you to work. He just wants to stand in front of you and make you work. And John Kavanagh says, stop hitting him in the arms. and then he immediately goes out and Mayweather continues just doing that, walking him down and making him work. So they knew what was going on. They just didn't really have very many answers to it. The gas tank thing is important. I mean, it comes up every time McGregor gasses in a fight, but... part of that is the power stuff, but I think in this fight it was the volume stuff. And also, sport-specific conditioning. This is something I wrote about in the pre-fight. I was saying, I don't know if he'll hold up for 12 rounds. And people were saying to me, no, he trains for 5 MMA rounds, 25 minutes, grueling, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going, no, it's a different thing. Even if it were the same length of time, it's different intervals, it's different round lengths, and also it's a completely different activity. There's a big difference, and you can't take as many breaks by, in the clinch in the Diaz fight, because you're expected to work in MMA, he could rest there a lot longer than he would be allowed to with someone like Robert Byrd breaking them every time they clinched. But also, if you look at the and this is another thing, people were talking about the lack of snap on his punches once he put on the big gloves, and the real lack of obvious power that he has in MMA. Again, it's that if you do 10, 15 years of boxing with the big gloves on for however many rounds, you become very conditioned for that. Your body changes. This game isn't just about strategy and techniques and things. It's about the process of building a fighter is as much about them developing into a fighter physically as it is developing the technical and strategic abilities in them. And you could work on your cardio for like 2 years solid to face Floyd Mayweather or someone like that. But if you're facing a guy who's boxed all his life and you've only been boxing for those 2 years, or you know, training for boxing competition for those 2 years, you know, you're going to have real trouble. The interesting question coming out of it is, could Mayweather have fought differently? Could he have been his old self? Nobody knows how much the age affected him. But the really interesting question coming out of this fight for me is how this whole experiment is going to affect McGregor's how McGregor looks, specifically his hands and footwork in the cage in future. I mean, Aldo, Anderson, anyone like that, if they'd taken half a year off to train just their boxing or kickboxing, had millions of dollars to work on it, had the full support of the UFC, and then got 10 rounds with one of the all-time greats at the end of it, how would that have affected their game when they came back to the UFC? I think it's a really interesting experiment, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens in McGregor's next fight. McGregor's next fight is the next big question we're going to talk about. They want to make Diaz. Obviously, Diaz doesn't deserve a title shot, but this is the problem with having McGregor at the top of the most competitive division in the MMA. And the division moves so fast, and he's fought like 3 guys in it. You know, he's fought Poirier, who was a featherweight when they fought. He's fought Diaz twice, but at 170 or whatever it was, and he fought Eddie Alvarez. You know, and Eddie Alvarez was the champion when he beat him. But also, the whole thing about this business is that it's difficult to show consistency. It's not difficult to come in and beat someone. It's difficult to keep beating people. You know, that's why Tony Ferguson is, well, to all intents and purposes, Tony Ferguson's the best lightweight in the world, proven, because he's beaten this murderer's row, and he's got the longest active streak in the lightweight division, or, you know, if you don't include Khabib's many, many wins over people you've never heard of. But they want to do this Diaz rematch, and this whole thing has just drawn attention to how the UFC basically fluked into Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor. They have no idea how to develop prospects or prepare for the future. And when we say prepare for the future, I'm not talking about like, oh, and we'll build up this guy so that he can face McGregor eventually. I'm just talking about getting compelling matchups together so that they can be seen and decide a future competitor for McGregor. You don't need to have one guy in mind. You just need to make sure that people care when whoever wins the matchup for next challenger wins it. You know, the whole thing was that they wouldn't pay Nate Diaz the money he wanted, which was like $1 million or something like that. You know, whatever he got for the last McGregor fight to fight again. You know, or let him to fight again if it was someone who wasn't McGregor. But had they swallowed their pride, paid for that, put it on a Fox card, fucking amazing. Have him fight Tony Ferguson. If Ferguson wins, which is fairly likely given Diaz's performance against top lightweights in the past, if Ferguson wins, every casual in the world knows that Tony Ferguson beat Nate Diaz and has a good shot at beating Conor McGregor. If Diaz wins, Diaz is due another title shot and everyone's fucking hype about it. And if Diaz loses, you can, of course, then have him fight someone else, win, and then give him a title shot again as the last guy who beat McGregor. I mean, why they haven't done this in the meantime is fucking baffling. And Khabib's just sitting there with nothing to do because he screwed the pooch on his last few fights, so they can't trust him with anything. And you got Tony Ferguson against my boy Kevin Lee for everyone's, you know, the thing everyone hates the most, the interim title. You got Max Holloway at the top of the featherweight division, and they're making no noise about it. They're not doing anything to say, hey, this guy, he fought Conor McGregor when they were both young and upcoming, but he's improved incredibly. Look what he did to Aldo, this, that, and the other. Just boggles the fucking mind that because they had this Mayweather-McGregor boxing match, they shut everything down. They didn't bother working on anything else. And they did literally shut everything down. 3 weeks up to this fight, no fucking fights in the UFC. This weekend, we got this Rotterdam card, which is dog shit. And then we got the Demetrius Johnson, Amanda Nunes headlined card, which is basically to get the hardcore fans riled up enough to buy a pay-per-view that would never sell any pay-per-views otherwise. So yeah, the UFC, not doing a good job. And then, of course, you got John Jones failing his drug test more recently, so that division's off the table. Nobody gives a shit about middleweight because the champion's fighting George St. Pierre, and most people don't consider the champion anyway. Robert Whittaker, who is probably the people's champion and the guy that people consider the number one middleweight in the world, is out for the best part of a year with an injury. Welterweight is Tyron Woodley's at the top of the heap, but nobody cares because his fights are so boring. Rory McDonald, the last guy to beat Tyron Woodley, was allowed to leave and go to Bellator because he wanted a bit more money. Just fucking stunning how poorly they're doing in this whole thing. And, people were asking me about this all weekend because I was out drinking with people who were going to watch this big fight. And they were saying, what is the UFC doing, this, that, and the other? Who's McGregor going to fight when he goes back there? And I caught myself saying, that joke we all make when people criticize companies, I caught myself saying it and I believed it. I could do this job better than the people they've got doing it now. It's embarrassing how little they've done to push anyone except McGregor. Even Amanda Nunes, the woman who beat Ronda Rousey last. Have you heard fucking anything about her in the she's got a fight in 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, and, there's nothing about her going on. In fact, they turned on her because she pulled out of the last fight, so, oh God. Anyway, that big fight's over. It was pirated by 3 million people. If you want to read my Giphy-filled post-fight, go read it at Vice. And I'll do a quick plug and then we'll come back and do some questions. Quick plug, Buy Notorious, the book that I wrote, which is the best book out on Conor McGregor, and fighting generally. And it's doing amazingly, because after this, I said last week, this could all be over, the McGregor mania stuff, but we rocketed higher up the Amazon chart, than we'd ever been before when that fight had happened. So the moral victory clearly did work. And if you're not a member of the Patreon, get on the Patreon. I'm probably going to use it to support both this podcast and the Big Fight Primer, the thing I'm doing at fightprimer.com, but only for big fights. I was thinking about doing Triple G versus Canelo. It's a huge fight, but I don't know if I've got enough time to get anything big together. I really want to keep the primer for really big video and written content. I like that mix of mediums. So yeah, get on the Patreon. We'll be doing a new history episode, hopefully going up next weekend. I'll let you know about that in the week, what we're doing. I always put up a cover picture that's related to, on my Facebook, that's related to the thing we're talking about. So that's always good fun, having people go, oh, it's this, that, or the other. So yeah, get in on that. And we'll do some questions from the Facebook thread. I want some rapid fire ones today. Rezgar asks, what about Conor versus Khabib? Yes, it would be huge in Russia. I would do a big fight primer for that. I've got ideas for it already. Presentation-wise, I'm really excited for it. But, again, Khabib can't be trusted. That's the whole thing, There's only a certain period in the year that he can fight because he has Ramadan. I was reading about someone in the UFC who does actually train for fights during Ramadan, which is just crazy. I mean, I roll with guys who have been fasting, and I just can't get over how hardcore that is. But I can totally understand him not wanting to train or fight when he's doing Ramadan. So that's off the table. And then you've got his injuries, and the weight cut is a new problem. So chances are that unless McGregor specifically asks for it, because it would be huge in Russia, and the whole Rocky thing probably appeals to him, that's probably not happening. But as a fight, I'd be very interested. I think Khabib, there's so much that opponents can learn from this Mayweather fight, and from the second Diaz fight. Just put your gloves up and walk forward. But I think Khabib is too into leaping in with crazy punches and shit. I think he'd play on the feet. He'd play right into McGregor's counterpunching game, unless his coaches were strict enough to just say, put your fucking forearms up and just walk him down. Do not leap at him. Walk him down, get him to the fence, take him down from there. I think it'd be really interesting to watch him dirty box along the fence because Diaz had a lot of success there. Diaz didn't have so much success when he was holding and hitting, had a lot of success freeing his hands and hitting along the fence. But again, that would be something that Khabib's team would need to work specifically with him on because it's not something he's shown before. But of course, dirty boxing along the fence, the main game of my boy Justin Gaethje. Oh! Nick says, how do you see the super... Oh, God, we're talking about super flyweights in boxing. I know Chocolatito, but I am not following the boxing game very much at the moment. It's just, I went off it because I love MMA so much, and it's much better, or more entertaining for me at least. But Nick also asks, Francis Ngannou, can he become the heavyweight champion? Absolutely, but I don't want to say anything too concrete because I know almost nothing about him. No one does. He fought Andrei Arlovski, but Andrei Arlovski has been chinny for years. It's can he hit the guy with the right hand before he takes the right hand with Arlovski? Arlovski's been knocked out in a quarter of the fights he's taken part in. It's a fucking embarrassment that he's still getting licensed to fight. But, Ngannou, he looks sharp enough. He looks sharp as a heavyweight. I don't know if he'd look sharp when we got him in there with someone like, someone like JDS who's a bit sharper on the feet, or someone like Verdum who's going to drag him into deep water. Verdum definitely not sharp on the feet, but definitely can put the pace on men and wilt them. I'm interested, and I'm cautiously watching his future, but I won't say anything too ridiculous about his potential just yet. Chris says, is everyone on steroids? Watch Icarus. That's a great thing about testing protocols. The thing is that guys are getting caught, which is indicative that the testing does work, but equally, guys don't just try this and then get caught. They've done it before. The chances are if they get caught, they've done it before and got away with it. Especially if you're someone who's got caught twice. Then you've already... you've probably done it several times because you're not going to get caught the only 2 times you do it. But anyway, enough about meme questions. Kim says, Bisping is just going to kick the shit out of GSP, isn't he? ? First fight at middleweight. At least he isn't a big hitter. But his counter wrestling has always been pretty good. And GSP has always liked being a fairly big guy. And of course all the ring rust. But then Bisping, ring rust against real competition, he's got like a year of it. Emil says, what did you think of Connor's sick MMA angles? Just talked about him. The Hikikomi. Love it. Jake says, did the UFC purposefully put Nunes and Mighty Mouse on the same card, given the controversy surrounding them both? Yeah, I reckon so. I reckon probably you're going to get the hot... This is the thing. People are like, stick it to Dana White. I'm going to buy Ray Borg versus Demetrius Johnson. Firstly, if it's a shit fight, don't buy it. Secondly, who gains money if you buy it out of spite? Oh, well. Anyway, Tom says, you're probably sick of this, but what is the actual difference between 10-ounce gloves and 8-ounce gloves? About 2 ounces. John says, is there added pressure on Canelo versus Triple G to be the fight boxing purists are hoping for? It'll be following MayMac. While a mad brawl would undoubtedly be exciting, does this fight need to be more technically refined to represent real boxing and separate itself from last weekend's spectacle? I can't see any... Well, I could see this fight going boringly, but neither man likes the clinch a lot. Both men like working on the inside. Both have developed decent jab over the years. So I can't really see this fight being too much of a snoozer. But again, it's so many years in the making, and that's the way with everything in boxing. They only have fights against nobodies and big fights. There's nothing in the middle, Chad says, in the McGregor-Mayweather fight, Conor had stages in the fight where he was using neo footwork, brackets, switching the stances while attacking, and he was getting some success. How do you think someone with an unorthodox style like Dominic Cruz, who uses this type of fighting, would go against Mayweather in a boxing fight? 1, don't use the term neo footwork ever again, please. 2, Dominic Cruz's boxing itself, not particularly slick. And I think the footwork probably gets fairly tiring after a few rounds. What Dominic Cruz does exceptionally is draw guys in, running at him, so he'll do those backstepping hooks like he did against TJ and Bermudez and all sorts of other guys. That tendency to run in MMA if you're presented this bigger distance. I also don't know how well it'd hold up in a ring against a good ring cutter. But a lot of it is that beautiful mixing in of takedowns and his kickboxing game. And his kicks are very underrated. They serve a real purpose, and because he's doing that constant stepping in and stepping out, he can step into them very easily and hide it quite well. I don't know if he'd do very well in boxing. His boxing is, to my eye at least, one of the areas where his unorthodoxy is for MMA perfect, but Cody Garbrandt beat him by getting him into a boxing match, basically drawing him forward, having him step in with punches and countering him. I'm really not interested in any other mixed martial arts versus boxing matches. I wasn't interested in this one. It turned out to be a decent enough fight, but there's really not any point to it. Except money. Connor says, what are your favourite martial arts films? Are there techniques or styles you think it would be cool to see on film that haven't been featured much? Bagua, maybe? What's the one he uses in Shenmue? The lads from Street Fighter use it. Is it Bagua-zang? I don't know, I'm always a big sucker for pro wrestling moves in martial arts films. The fight scene in They Live with Rowdy Roddy Piper. Whenever they use BJJ in a movie, it always comes off pretty lame. But I'm a huge fan of anything Tony Jaa does. The story for his movies got progressively more and more shit, but his stunts are always amazing. Gymnastics and Muay Thai, just a brilliant combination for martial arts films. I liked the Ip Man films, but then I found out that they were basically just Chinese propaganda. That whole MMA fighter versus Chinese kung fu thing is hilarious. There was an article about that this week it was a major publication, can't remember what it was. But basically the consensus in the comments on Reddit was this guy's going to get suicided. Just one of those shot himself 6 times in the back of the head dealies. Or fan death. Is that Korea they have that? If you're unfamiliar, fan death is where if someone commits suicide, the police say that because South Korea has a very high suicide rate. I don't know what North Korea's is like, but the police say that he died because he left his extractor fan on and it sucked all the air out of the room. Something which happens in no other nation because it's impossible. David says, how badly brain damaged is Brendan Schaub? Well, that's not really nice to joke about. But I am looking forward to not having to see him on TV ever again. And his beef with Nate Diaz, hilarious stuff. Actually, we might as well treat this a little bit seriously, but from what I've read about knockouts, generally, as in like proper stiff body fencing reflex or, flop to the floor knockouts, I've read that some theories think that it is the brain protecting the body from further damage by like shutting it down and playing dead almost. I always wonder if someone who has an amazing chin can take all that damage is going to come out more brain damaged than someone like... Well, sure, without being dickish about it, I mean, he didn't have a very good chin. Nobody gets knocked out by Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira. That guy famously had pillow hands. But, being a guy that gets shut off by the first big shots that he takes, is that better for you in the long run, health-wise, than being someone who can take everything in the kitchen sink? It's interesting. And I mean, I've talked about this before, and I wrote about it in Notorious, but the effects of punches to the head are nowhere near uniform. George Chuvalo, who is famous for having one of the best chins ever, which you only find out if you get hit a fucking lot, he's still lucid and articulate and a wonderful speaker who tells great stories whenever they interview him in his 70s. And I believe Jake LaMotta, who is, again, famous for his chin and for his hundreds of fights, was still a public speaker, and he's like 90 now. Meanwhile, guys like Jerry Quarry, who was just a tough journeyman, fought many of the same opponents as Chuvalo. He ended up almost completely unaware of his own surroundings just 4 years after he retired from boxing. It's scary. And I'm sure that that's part of the reason that Brendan Schaub made the decision, okay, look, I'll go do a podcast. I'll be a media personality as opposed to, a not the best fighter. I mean, if you're not the best and you're just going to keep getting hurt by mid-carders, if there's a real obvious limit on what you can do, sometimes it's better to just go into something else. So respect to him for that. Nick says, what's the over-under on this mural getting painted over with a picture of Conor McGregor in front of that ridiculous mural of him punching Mayweather in the face? The The Rubber Bandits did an amazing thing about this on their Facebook page. There's a pipe sticking out under Conor's arm on the mural, and they said it looks like he's holding a scroll because he's going to give him a boxing lesson or something like that. It was really funny. Go read the Rubber Bandits thing about that, or just watch some Rubber Bandits videos. Gary says, analyse the rematch. That's not a question, firstly, and secondly, God, I hope there's not a rematch now that you've said that. Hassa posts a picture from MMA Fighting's Twitter with the punches landed against Mayweather. Canelo 117, McGregor 111, Pacquiao 81. Jesus. Shame on MMA Fighting for playing into this bullshit. Nikki asks, do you think Floyd carried Conor till the 10th? It came out that he betted $500,000 on himself to win at 9.5 rounds or something like that. I don't think you can bet on yourself to win in like roughly the 9.5 round limit. But no, I don't think he carried him. I think he did exactly what he needed to do. He walked him down until he was completely tired and then knocked him out. I think if he could have knocked him out earlier, he would have. And Conor was getting tired from like the 3rd round onward. Actually, the really sad thing in the aftermath of this fight, someone sent it to me, was Mayweather tweeted this photo of him of like a darkened room. It might have been his own club, but just dozens of glassy-eyed strippers twerking and money all over the floor and not a friend in sight. Like, that's the thing about Floyd Mayweather generally. Not a pleasant person for a start, but actually he comes off quite well in some of the interviews he does. He came off all right in the one with Ariel, but when you have money from so young, and particularly in the fight game, you are going to be surrounded by hangers-on. Everyone at that press conference was either someone who paid to stand next to him or someone who was hoping to get paid for standing next to him. I doubt the guy has any real friends, and that's really sad. He's got Zab Judah in his camp for sparring and stuff now, and they had famous beef, but they were on the Olympic team about the same time, I believe, and they had very similar career paths, and Zab's fallen off now. He's probably not getting very much money to fight, but at least in Zab Judah he's got someone who's gone through similar stuff and has had all these hangers-on and money trouble and all the shit that comes with being a super successful prize fighter. Quite sad to think about, but again, the guy's track record with women and things like that makes it hard to be sympathetic for him, but equally it's hard to dig yourself out of a hole when you're surrounded by people who are just there to yes man, and will leave you as soon as you run out of money. And I suppose, people complain about Conor McGregor not moving camps or how he sticks with a small camp, blah, 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 and things like that. But, the guy's big on loyalty, and I think that's going to go both ways, because he will run out of money eventually if, every other prize fighter in history is anything to go by. And then having those people who were his friends before he was rich will be a good thing. Anyway, we're getting towards the end of the hour, and frankly, there's fuck all going on at the moment. I mean, we've got Stefan Struve this weekend fighting Volkov, or whoever it is, and a load of guys on that. A couple of Russian prospects, but a ton of people that I've just either never heard of or don't care about. So I won't bother giving you like a preview on that in the podcast. Maybe I'll write something small on it later, but it'll just be the same. Stefan Struve, why hasn't he learned to use his reach? Here is an example of him stepping in too close and getting cracked over the head. I like Stefan Struve, but he is an obvious case of wasted potential. If he could improve his wrestling, his ground game's absolute money. Spinning Darce chokes and all that shit, but it's hard to watch him because it's just... So, and, you can be a long guy and work on the inside. John Jones is a long guy who worked on the inside. Riddick Bowe was a long guy who worked on the inside, but not having the understanding of why you're getting cracked in the head, you still have to fight like you're on the inside. You can't just be like, oh, I'm tall, so I don't have to defend myself. Anyway, I'll catch you later. Oh, I just realised that I never did touch on the scorecards. Yes, the first 3 rounds... I think all 3 judges gave the first round to McGregor, but the second and third rounds, they also gave to 2 of them gave to Floyd or something like that. Anyway, McGregor the thing is, even if your strategy revolves around the other guy punching himself out, if you're not throwing punches, you shouldn't be winning that round. It doesn't matter if you're throwing like 6 punches and connecting 5 of them, and you're working at a higher percentage than the guy who threw, 50 punches and connected 30 of them. You're still landing almost no punches, and they're landing punches. So yeah, that just made boxing look very bad. Very silly business. In 2 of those rounds, Floyd threw 6 punches. So there's no way he should have been winning that round. But then the flip side of that is that the people who pre-fight were saying it only takes 1 for McGregor to knock you out, are now touting how many punches he landed. So they've got to realise that there's a difference in the if you're saying that he doesn't have the power that was advertised, or you're saying that those connections weren't clean, so what's the point in counting those connections? Anyway, and regarding Vice have decided to keep Vice Sports open. They backtracked on the closing of editorial almost immediately because it was a bit of a daft idea for a company that used to be a magazine. I expect they'll continue to walk that back throughout the next year or so. But I'm just doing stuff when they want stuff or when they need stuff, and continuing on whatever else I want to be doing. Like I said, I've got a big piece coming for Battles of London, so make sure to pick up their magazine to read all the stuff about the Marquess of Queensberry and Queensberry rules. Everyone was on about Queensberry rules last week, even though we're not. The Queensberry rules aren't actually what they were fighting under. Anyway, I've been your boy Jack Slack. Sign up to the Patreon, buy the book, head over and bookmark the fightprimer.com or fightprimer.com. I own both. Because something cool will crop up there soon. And I'll catch you next week. Cheers. It's good to have MMA back in my life.